Dan jangan lupa teman-teman, besok malam kita akan manggung di Buro Bird and Garden di Jalan Sumatera. It's 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. and it's free entrance. Jadi teman-teman silahkan datang. Ada yang nggak tahu Buro Bird and Garden di mana? Dekat Colors? Generasi Colors? Nggak ada? Oke. Di Jalan Sumatera ya. Sebelahnya apartemen Sumatera. Dekat situ. Silahkan bisa bergabung, ajak teman-teman. It's free entrance. Kita akan semi outdoor, concert full. It's gonna be fun. Dan minggu depan kita juga ada satu program ya lagi, diskusi mengenai human trafficking. It's very different, I know. Dari musik tiba-tiba kita ngomongin ke human trafficking. Tapi memang program di Amerika topiknya sangat luas, mulai dari musik sampai ke isu perdagangan manusia, sampai ke jurnal atau di @US Congen SBY. Sekalian saya iklan ya. Silakan follow dan like. Nanti setelah selesai acara teman-teman juga bisa mention kita. Kita bisa saut-sautan di sosial media dengan hashtag JazzUS. Sambil nunggu, oke, Ibu Christine Getzler-Pon sudah ada di sini. Langsung kita todong untuk memberikan sedikit sambutan untuk teman-teman supaya lebih kenal dengan konsulat. Silakan Ibu Christine.
Apa kabar? Okay, so I'm excited to see some participants from our workshop this morning. So hello again. And I'm excited to see some new faces new old faces. We have some old friends who have returned to the consulate and some new faces. Ada orang itu pertama kali yang berkunjung ke Kongen? Raise your hand. Who's here for the first time? Selamat datang ke Konsulat Amerika. So thank you to our friends who are coming for the first time today. You're all in for an amazing treat. We are so lucky to have Gabrielle and Pat with us today to talk about jazz, to talk about the history of American music, to answer your questions, and perhaps most excitingly, to perform a few songs for us. So ini satu cara bahwa pemerintah Amerika Serikat mau menjalin hubungan dengan orang Indonesia untuk berbagi budaya AS dan juga belajar tentang kalian tentang budaya Indonesia. Jadi kalau Anda mau bertanya kepada musik di Amerika atau berbagi pengalaman Anda dengan musik Indonesia, silakan. I know we have someone here who plays the gamelan, who can talk about traditional music. So if there's something you want to share about Indonesian music and culture, please go ahead because we want to learn from you too. Jadi juga saya harap bahwa akan bertemu besok di concert di Buro Bar and Garden jam 6 sore di Jalan Sumatera. Yeah? So tomorrow I hope I see a bunch of you tomorrow at our concert at Buro Bar and Garden. But other than that, I will turn it over to you guys.
Thank
you. So you can take it away.
Thank you so much.
There we are. Hi. I'm also glad that we see some people from the workshop. We didn't scare you off, that means. Good. Estelle, Christine, do you want to translate or should I just go?
Teman-teman kira-kira perlu diterjemahin atau no? Okay, nanti waktu during the Q&A session when they ask questions, I can help. We trick you. We trick you.
All right. Shall we? I'm an F. Let's fall in love. Let's fall in love. Why should we fall in love? Our hearts are made of it. Let's take a chance. Why be afraid of it? Let's close our eyes and make our own paradise. Little we know of it, still we can try to make a go of it. We might have been meant for each other, to be or not to be. Let our hearts discover. Let's fall in love. Why shouldn't we fall in love? Now is the time for it while we are young. Let's fall in love. I have a feeling, it's a feeling I'm concealing. I don't know why. It's just a mental, incidental, sentimental alibi. But I adore you, so strong for you. Why go on stalling? Love is calling. I am falling. Why be shy? Let's fall in love. Why shouldn't we fall in love? Now is the time for it while we are young. Let's fall in love. Let's close our eyes and make our own paradise. Still, we can try to make a go of it. We might have been meant for each other to be or not to be. Let's go on and let our hearts discover. Let's fall in love. Why shouldn't we fall in love? Now is the time for it while we are young. Let's fall in love. Now is the time while we are young. Let's fall in love. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. We're going to do a sort of hybrid lecture slash concert. I want to talk a bit, we're going to expand a little bit on some things that we talked about in our workshop this morning about how jazz began in the United States, the different influences that came together to create this music. And we'll talk a little bit about how it changed and developed over the years. Please, if you have a burning question to ask, if there's something I'm not being clear about, please feel free to raise your hand or even just shout at me. Okay. I know, right? I'll regret saying that, I'm sure. So jazz is this incredible American export because it's so representative of American culture. In that, like, what does it mean to be American? When we are a country of immigrants, our American culture is a mix of all the cultures people brought from whatever country they immigrated from. So we know that jazz began in New Orleans. Does anybody, you guys know, are familiar with New Orleans? You know where that is? In the United States. It's in the south of the United States. And I'm from the north. I'm from the northeast part of the US. I'm a New Yorker. So people from New Orleans, they say Nolans. They wouldn't, they would make fun of me for saying New Orleans. But that's what we'll say for today. So we don't know the date. We cannot say when jazz began. We know around early part of the 1900s it started to develop. Why did it develop in New Orleans? Because New Orleans was a port city. So there were people coming in this city from many different places. You had ships coming in from Spain. Spain actually owned New Orleans. It was a Spanish territory for quite a few years. So their music and their culture influenced New Orleans. There were a lot of boats coming in from France. So you got European music. And then, of course, there were African slaves in New Orleans. And they brought their church music, right? They had religious music. They had work songs and chants that they would sing while they were working. And on Sundays, there was a square in New Orleans called Congo Square. And the slaves were allowed to congregate in this square and dance and play music. So all the people living in New Orleans heard all of this music, Spanish rhythms, European harmony, and sort of what we call like standard song form, which we'll touch on again later, and the African rhythms that the slaves had. So there was a cornet player who I mentioned this morning. His name was Buddy Bolden. He lived in New Orleans. Now the thing was, after the Civil War, right, there were all these bands, like an army band. When they disbanded, they still had these instruments. And a lot of poor people and slaves took up these instruments, a lot of brass, a lot of cornet, trumpet, and they taught themselves to play by ear. And that's another thing that really factors into what makes jazz jazz. It's not like classical music in the sense that, right, you really have to, there's a very clear path you take to learn classical music. You go from scales and you learn specific pieces, whereas jazz is this music that was developed by four people, really. So they were playing by ear. They didn't take music lessons. They taught themselves how to play the instruments, and they heard the melodies, played them by ear. One thing Buddy Bolden was known for is that he would hear melodies and then he would change them. He would play them in his own way to fit his horn. So this spirit of improvisation and molding the music in the way you want it is a building block. That's the foundation of jazz music. So what we like to do is we're gonna play a few different songs, but we're gonna use the song Honeysuckle Rose as an example to sort of illustrate today the ways in which jazz changed. Um, Honeysuckle Rose, excuse me, was written by Honeysuckle Rose, was written by a man named, he went by the name Fats Waller. His name was Thomas Fats Waller. Fats was his nickname. He was a big guy. He had these big eyes. He was known not just as a pianist and a singer, but like as a comedian almost. He had a really big personality. And he played in a sort of stride piano style. And what that means, oh, did you want to? Can you make that left hand? I know you're. So stride piano got its name because the pianist's left hand was really covering like the role that the bass plays in a band now. The pianist, the left hand was doing this. It was striding, making big strides across the piano. That's why stride got its name. Fats Waller was a stride pianist. And he laid, people like Fats Waller, who played stride piano, laid the foundation for jazz as we know it today. They moved it away. It was still sort of straight rhythmically, like classical music, but it had a little more interesting stuff going on. Should we do Honeysuckle?
Here we go.
Are you writing out a chart?
Yeah, I can throw it up. Yeah, come on.
Do you want to join us?
Here's your chart.
What's your name?
Harun.
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 Great.
Harun.
Great to meet
Okay.
you.
Welcome.
Are you familiar with Honeysuckle?
Okay, you know this, right? Okay. It's the same as.
Yeah. So I know I lost my music stand. I have that chair back. Yes, thank you. Sorry.
But we'll play it like a stride.
So we're gonna play this song, the Fats Waller wrote. Perfect. And we're gonna play it in this sort of
A little slower.
stride style. So this is a decent approximation of what it would have sounded like, say, in the 1910s or early 1920s. One, two, right on it. 1, 2. Every honeybee fills with jealousy when they see you out with me. I don't blame them, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose. When you're passing by, flowers droop inside, and I know the reason why. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose. I don't buy sugar. You just have to touch my. You're my sugar. So sweet when you stir it up. When I'm taking sips from your tasty lips. How the honey fairly drips. Your confection, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose. So that's so that's kind of how that feels. I made you guys do this morning. Can everybody stand up for me, please? Just in your seat, kind of stay where you are, but stand for me. And can you guys play that again for me? A 1, yep, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, couple things to notice. Harun is doing this more stridey thing. Bump, bump. And if you listen to Pat, how many? Raise your hand if you have any knowledge of music, just so I know. Yeah, don't be shy. I'm not going to pull you up on stage right now. I'm just curious. So, do you guys know what it means, like a measure in music? Have you heard this term? So, that's kind of how we break it down phrase by phrase. In this song, 4 beats make a measure. 2, 3, 4. Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4. Every time 4 beats passes, that's another measure. If you notice, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, right? He's only really playing 2 beats at the bar. All 4 beats are still there, right? You tap your foot. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. But he's playing on 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. March for me. 1, 3. 1, 3. March in place. 1, 3. You're gonna step on beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it feels kind of like a marching band, right? It's very straight. Great. Great. So you feel emphasis is on 1 and 3. 1, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, clap that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Feel that? I want you to feel it in your whole body. Great. Excellent. Okay. So that is early jazz music. Now, it feels like marching music in a way because in the early days of jazz, you guys can sit down. Sorry. Jazz bands in the early days, and New Orleans still has this deep tradition of marching bands. If you've ever seen a video of them, when somebody has a funeral or there's a celebration, trio, piano, bass, drums developed. Once jazz was sort of a stationary kind of music, they could have these big instruments that didn't need to move around. So that's kind of the early 1900s, 1910s. Now, 1920 through 1950 really is considered the golden age of American music. And if you ever hear anybody refer to the Great American Songbook, we are referring to music that was written during that time. Louis Armstrong, who I bet a lot of you have heard of, the great trumpet player Louis Armstrong. He played and also had that funny, scratchy voice. Oh, Betty, right, sound like he just needed to clear his throat all the time. So he was, I think, after Buddy Bolden, like the next major figure in jazz. Not that there weren't other people, but Louis Armstrong is another major figure who sort of ushers in the next era of jazz. And that's something that's so interesting to me about this music, that a lot of the changes are like very reactionary. So, right, it was a very straight music, and then Buddy Bolden said, "No, I want to change these melodies. I want to play them the way I'm hearing them, the way that fits my horn." So again, this is the spirit of jazz, always taking the music where it's at and then changing it to what you as an individual can bring to the music. It's freedom of expression is such a huge part of this music. Should we do Just Squeeze Me?
Sure.
Yeah, you and me.
I'll show him.
Okay, great. Do you wanna talk about
What
it?
key are you in?
I'm in B flat. So, I want to scat a little bit because Louis Armstrong was sort of, he's considered the person who invented scat singing. Have you guys heard this term scat singing? Okay. So that just means you're still singing the melody of the song, but you aren't singing words. So where I just sang every honeybee fills with jealousy. Now I would do boo baby boo baby, still singing the melody, but I'm sort of imitating an instrument, right? So that is what Louis Armstrong did. Do you want to tell the story of why he did that? Go ahead, Patty.
Okay, I'm gonna be Louis Armstrong. Can you play this song? Play this.
Honeysuckle?
So Louis Armstrong was in a recording session. This is the story. It could be true. He was in a recording session and he was reading the music. He was reading the lyrics to the song. He knew the melody in his ear. He knew the melody, but he didn't know the lyrics. So let's say he was doing this song and he's going, ready? 1, 2, 1. You have to read this?
Should I do it
No,
with
here's
my
the music.
with my awesome
so Louis
Louis
reading the
Armstrong
music on the
impression?
music stand. Go. 2, 3, 4. No, I'm sorry, this one. 2, 3, 4. Every honeybee filled with jealousy when you start to do bumpy dip, but
Very good.
The music dropped and he had to do something, so he just kept
So the story goes. So we're gonna do this song that was written by Duke Ellington, who was another great African American composer of American music. Take the A Train. He had a big hit with his band on that. And this song we're gonna play for you. It's called "Just Squeeze Me." Is a song that Duke Ellington wrote.
It's the same as this. Okay.
And I'll scat a little bit just to give an example of what that sounds like. Same early feel? Where do you want to do it?
We'll start that way.
Okay. Treat me sweet and gentle. So is that okay? Treat me sweet and gentle when you say goodnight. Just squeeze me, but please don't tease me. I get sentimental when you're holding me tight. Just squeeze me, but please don't tease me. Oh, I'm missing you since you went away, singing the blues away each day, counting the nights I'm waiting for you. I'm in the mood to let you know I never knew I loved you so. Please say that you love me too. When I get this feeling, I'm in ecstasy. So squeeze me, but baby, please don't tease me. Oh, you little bit, but a so squeeze me, but baby, please don't tease me. Just squeeze me, but baby, please don't tease me. So, I was still singing, right? just singing the words, but I was playing with the melody a little bit, changing some of the notes, making up phrases that were based on the melody as it's written in the tune. And also something we talked about this morning, moving phrases around. So where it's written like this: treat me sweet and gentle when you say goodnight. Clap for me. Be sweet and gentle. Right? All 4 beats. Ooh, ooh, be. Now I could sing it. Sorry, go back to the top for me. I want you. Treat me sweet and gentle. Oh, when you say goodnight, just squeeze me. But baby, please don't tease me. So this is great. So this is again part of improvisation, right? It's not just scat singing. You can improvise when you're singing the words, but you can change. Treat me sweet and gentle when you say goodnight. So I'm singing the same lyrics, but I'm changing the melody from the way the composer wrote it, and I'm changing the phrasing, the timing of the melody. Instead of treat me sweet and gentle, I do treat me sweet and gentle. When you say goodnight, just squeeze me. But please don't tease me, right? And that way, the other great thing about that is it becomes more conversational. You know, you can really personalize it. And this is such a big part of being a vocalist, is that yes, I'm an instrument, right? I'm going to sing the melody. There's rhythm in what I'm doing, but I'm also telling a story. So I really want to communicate that to the audience. What's the song about? Who am I singing about? Who am I imagining that I'm singing it to? Sorry, I'm Italian, so once I get talking, it's very hard for me to stop. Okay, so that was an approximation of scat singing, right? Of what Louis Armstrong created, this incredible thing that he created. Now, that's kind of the 20s and 30s. And when we move into the 40s, the 1940s, this becomes the big band era. Do you want to say anything? Yeah. The beat changes. Whereas this whole time you've been hearing Pat boom, 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 right? Beep, boop, beep, boop, beat, the beat starts becoming more and more syncopating. So remember we were doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna ask you to stand up again. I think this will be the last time, but I'm making no guarantees. Yes. So we did this morning. This dance developed in the 30s, really, right? I think, called the Charleston, and the dance went along with this beat.
2, 3, 4.
So we've still got 4 beats in the measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 beats still there. Whereas before we were accenting 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 3. Now we're accenting what we call the off beats. Like 1 and 3 that's on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. You give emphasis to 2 and 4. And really, you can break it down 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. This is what the Charleston looks like. That's how people did it. 1 and 2 and 3. So we'll march on 1 and 3, clap on 2 and 4. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Excellent. And really get your whole body into it. Give that accent on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Feel the difference? 1, 3, 1, 3. Now we're 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. So this is how great. You all have good rhythm. ahead, sit down. This is how jazz becomes dance music. Now, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, how jazz became sort of a more like intellectual type of music that you just sit and listen to, and it can feel very inaccessible. But in its earliest forms, it was dance music. And these more syncopated feeling beats, um, I think, reflect the times in a sense that people were, how do I say this? Rules were relaxing in terms of how you could behave or dance in public, right? And the music started to reflect that. And in a way, I think the musicians led the way in a sense. So you have more, the Charleston was like a shocking dance when it first came out, and was something that if you were like a proper upstanding person, you probably didn't do. It was like, younger people who were trying to break out of the rules started this dance craze. And eventually the rules relax and it's no big deal, and then we move on to the next, breaking down sort of the next barrier, breaking the next rule. But this beat, which is really what we think of as a swing beat, and it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, is what we get to in the 1940s. And the 1940s is like the era of the big band. And what do I mean when I say big band? So remember, we've Buddy Bolden, right? Jazz moved inside. We've got our piano, bass, and drums. And that's referred to as the rhythm section. Even though pianos can play melodies, it's actually considered a rhythm instrument. And in a big band, you would have that trio and maybe a guitar, right? Early guitar players also played rhythm guitar. And then you'd have about 16 or 17 horn players, saxophones, trombones, and trumpets. 4 or 5 of each?
Ish.
Around there. Pat, in the early days of his career, played in some of the big, very well-known big bands in the U.S. Do you want to talk anything about that?
So as Gabrielle mentioned, there were many big bands in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And some of the more well-known bands were the Count Basie Orchestra. Do you know about Count Basie? He was great. Out of Kansas City. And the Duke Ellington Orchestra. They called it an orchestra, but it really was a big band. And then Lionel Hampton, and there were a lot of, those are the African American bands that were well known, Jimmy Lunsford. And then there were a lot of white big bands, the Paul Whiteman Orchestra, and the Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey orchestras. And mostly they were dance bands. They played dance music. But at the same time they were playing dance music, there were some great soloists in the band. So if you got to hear these groups, these bands, you would not only get to dance to them, you get to hear incredible music and incredible soloists and incredible arrangements. It was kind of the heyday of big band arranging, and they got very creative with their arranging styles. And I think after a while they tried to outdo each other, see which one could come up with the best, greatest, interesting arrangement. But what we prefer is the music that felt the best, that had a really good groovy feel to it. And that would mostly be the Count Basie Orchestra or the Jimmy Lunsford orchestras. Yeah, later on we're going to simulate a big band. We're going to have our own big band. There's going to be a rhythm section, and then you'll all get to sing and be the horn players.
Very soon.
Now,
let's do Honeysuckle.
Right now we're going to do the same song we've been playing, but we'll play it in a swing style, more or less like what the big bands would have done.
I'm not quitting. I'm sorry. I'm just looking for a bottle of water.
And we lost our singer. There she goes. She's moving to Indonesia. Drink up. So we're gonna do the same song, but this time we're gonna swing it. And I'm gonna play 4/4 on the bass. What does that mean? I'll show you right now. Where I was playing, you're gonna count.
1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2.
So I was playing every first and third beat, correct? Of the 4 beats. 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. Okay. Now I'm going to play all 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4.
3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
And that is referred to as a walking the bass. Yeah?
Walking the bass. Okay, I'm walking. It looks like my fingers are walking.
And this also, the style of piano playing changed. Whereas we had that heavy left hand that was playing the bass notes, boom, 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 boom. The pianist moved away from, because now the bass player's got all 4 notes. So the piano doesn't need to cover that. So it freed up the piano player to also play, change the phrasing, play in a more open style. Can we just do 1A? Let's start Honeysuckle in that traditional, in that 2 beat, and then we're going to swing it. So you guys can hear it's the same song, but you're going to get a sense of how the beat changed. Yeah, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody feels when they see you out with me. I don't think their goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose. Now we're gonna swing it. When you're passing by without you inside, and I know the reason why. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose. I don't buy sugar. You just have to touch my cup. You're my sugar, so sweet when you stir it up. When I'm taking sips from your lips, and the honey fairly drips. Your perfection, goodness knows, honeysuckle rose. Feels of jealousy when they see you out with me. I don't blame them, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose when you're passing by our side, and I know why, 'cause you're much sweeter, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose, I don't buy sugar, 'cause you just have to touch my cup. You're my sugar, so sweet when you serve it up. When I'm taking sips from your tasty lips, how the honey fairly drips. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. Your confection head to toes. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. You are my honeysuckle rose. It went from a much more a straighter feel to this very open thing where there's a lot of improvising. There's a conversation happening. And not that there isn't a conversation happening in that earlier music. I think that conversation opened up, became more playful in a way, you know?
And a big part of it is for those of you who were here before when we created our own big band, especially the vocalists. Vocalists. Tell me your names again.
Randy,
Jackson. Randy Jackson. He was one of the Jackson.
Zita, and Beta. Thank you.
And so at one point, Gabrielle sang a phrase, and then she put the mic in your face. Okay? And she sang, what did you sing? Go ahead.
What did we
Hey,
sing?
call and response.
Boobida,
Boobadida,
boobida,
boobadida,
boobida.
boo. Okay, so she sang a phrase, and then I sang it back to her. And that's called call. She made the call. And response. I responded to it. Okay? And I pretty much tried to sing the same thing that she sang. And that occurs in most musics, what they call call and response. It occurs in classical music and rock music and jazz music, all kinds of music, call and response. Very, very important. So you might want to listen for that in the time that we're here, the next hour or so. Listen for call and response. Now I can do it in my own solo, for instance. I'm going to call and respond with myself. So just play these chords, please. Right? So da, boom, it. Okay, like that. Here we go. Two, go 1, 2, 3, da. So there was some call and response right there. The call was the response again. You see what's going on? Yeah. Okay, so if I went to you, la 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 la. La la la. Oopa doopa da. Oopa doopa Okay, good. Now you understand the concept of call and response. It's in all musics. Okay? Listen for it. It's very, very important.
It's also worth mentioning. So 1940s, we have all these big bands. A lot of the big bands featured, yes, all these horns, they would feature a singer as well. Ella Fitzgerald got her start as a big band singer. Anita O'Day, who I mentioned to some of you this morning, Anita O'Day is a wonderful American jazz singer, not as well known as Ella or Sarah Vaughan. At home, she's pretty well known, and man, could she improvise! She was an incredible improviser. And the reason these women were such good improvisers was because they would sing a couple of songs with the band, and then when they weren't singing, they'd just be sitting off stage listening to the band, and they'd be listening to what the horn players were improvising. And Ella Fitzgerald said, part of the way she learned to scat, the reason she started doing that was because she wanted to do with her voice what she heard these people doing with their horns. Go ahead.
So what does that mean? It means that jazz is a language, and Ella Fitzgerald was sitting there listening to the language. She could, of course, sing the lyrics. She knew the melodies to the songs, but she was learning the language while the sax player is playing a solo, and the next player gets up and plays a solo. She's hearing all kinds of new language and all kinds of language that she can steal from them, so that later on she could create her interpretation of the language, of the jazz language. And it's the same way we learn to speak a language when we're little kids. Our parents, our older brothers, siblings are around the house speaking the language, speaking English, for instance, when we were little kids. And I'm 2 years old or 1 year old, and I'm looking up at them and they're saying things, and I'm trying to figure out what they're saying. After a while, I learned to say one word, 2 words, put a sentence together, make up a paragraph. Okay, and it's the same thing in jazz music, is you have to immerse yourself in the language the same way you were when you were a little kid learning the language that you speak. Okay, and that was a perfect example of how Ella Fitzgerald and Anita O'Day learned the language, was by hearing the language that the saxophonists were playing. Okay, there's no mystery to it. It takes a lot of immersing yourself in the music, but it can be done. I'm sure. I'm going to do a 1-minute interview with Harun. 1-minute interview. Ready? 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 Here goes. Okay. Harun, why do you like jazz music? Why? Okay, interview's over. So anyway. How old were you when you first heard jazz music?
Can you repeat the
How
question?
old were you when you first heard jazz music?
Oh, umur berapa? Ketika kamu pertama kali? 19.
19. And you're only 20 now. You learned a lot in 1 year. But what made you like? Do you like jazz music? What do you like? What made you like? You can play.
Apa yang buat kamu suka? Apa yang buat kamu suka apa?
Improvisasinya.
The improvisation.
You like the freedom part. The freedom.
Yang kamu suka part bebasnya itu ya?
Ya.
You're free to express yourself, to play melodies that come spontaneously to you.
Ya, kamu suka spontanitasnya itu gimana? Ya. Ya.
Right?
Ya, benar. Right. Yes, right.
Okay, I don't need to say much more. That's a good interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a 1-minute interview.
What was that for?
Okay, I know there was a reason.
I know there was.
There was a reason, and the reason why is because this gentleman, you grew up in Indonesia. You're from Surabaya.
Oh, right.
Surabaya.
Asli
Okay,
Surabaya.
you're in Surabaya, but you like the music from, the USA, right? You like that music.
Yes.
Oh, you
Kamu
like
suka
you like jazz
musik
music.
jazz
Suka,
US
suka,
gitu.
Suka. Karena temen sih.
But wait, that music is another language.
Oke.
Jazz.
Iya. Iya, musik itu kamu suka bahasa yang gimana
Ya.
gitu.
Okay, so how did you learn that other language?
Bagaimana kamu
The
belajar itu?
language of jazz. How did you learn it?
Gimana kamu cara belajarnya waktu itu?
Lihat YouTube sih.
From YouTube.
What's the YouTube?
Yeah.
Yeah, from YouTube.
So he was
Ah.
doing what?
Yeah,
Say it again.
Yep.
Listening.
Listen.
Listening.
Wow, what a concept! Music, listening, painting
Yeah.
with your eyes closed. Okay. We were talking earlier about how we're so fortunate now in this modern age that we have on the internet, we have YouTube, for instance. If we want to learn something, we dial in YouTube. You want to learn this song, what's the name of the song?
Honeysuckle Rose.
Honeysuckle Rose. You want to learn Honeysuckle Rose. You type in Honeysuckle Rose and 40 films and recordings come up of Honeysuckle Rose. right? You want to learn about it, then you listen to it and you take, you steal, you grab every little bit of it you can. In other words, somebody on the recording is going this, and then you stop the recording and you play. Okay, you hear the recording, somebody goes, you stop the recording, you play. Okay, until you get all those little licks, all those little phrases in your head and under your fingers, and you're learning the language. Look, here's one word. Here's two words. Here's three words. Here's a sentence. Okay? You understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
But it requires a lot of time. That's just all. That's all there is to it. You have to lock the room. What's it called? A lock on the door, and stay in your room and practice, and keep stealing, using your ear to find the sounds. There's no mystery to it. All right, we'll go back to the lecture.
Do you want to do blues and then rhythm changes? Or you want to do rhythm changes now and then do big band?
Yeah, rhythm change.
Okay. So,
You
we're
know,
gonna
I got rhythm.
talk. We're gonna play this song called "I Got Rhythm." I always like to talk about George Gershwin. You guys heard of George Gershwin? So he is considered one of the, if not the greatest composer of this golden age, 1920 through 1950. He and his brother Ira Gershwin, who wrote the lyrics to his songs. George Gershwin wrote the melodies, and he is somebody who really elevated the form, sort of took, built upon what people were doing before him. He was very well versed. He also wrote classical music. And that was something that was so special about his writing, and what makes it so brilliant is that he really merged European classical music and jazz music, which was much more influenced. He was very influenced. George Gershwin loved black spiritual music. He loved black culture, and so the mix of these two things, this European classical music and black music, is really what makes jazz. And the other funny ingredient is that a lot of the great composers who were writing from 1920 to 1950 were Jewish immigrants. So they also had all of that music, the music you hear in a synagogue, which has a different flavor from all the other stuff we've talked about. So they had been brought up listening to that. But Irving Berlin, George Gershwin, Harold Arlen, all these great American composers also happen to be Jewish immigrants. So you've got Europe, yes?
Burt Bacharach.
Yes,
Later on.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Look after.
Yes, I love
James
that song. It's a beautiful song. So you've got Jewish immigrants writing the music, people like Duke Ellington and Fats Waller and Ella Fitzgerald, black musicians playing the music for an audience of predominantly white Christians. So it's a big stew of cultural influences. We're going to play this song that George Gershwin wrote. It's very well known. It's called I Got Rhythm. And the Pat will talk. Do you want to talk first? So play it first. What do you want to do?
I'll just talk. Thank you.
Just talking about the structure of this
So-
song.
We mentioned before, earlier today, we were talking about song form. We were talking about standards, standard chord progressions. And the progression we're about to play became known as rhythm changes. And really what they mean is it's based on the name of the song, I Got Rhythm. What's the melody?
I got rhythm, I've got music, I've got my man who could ask for anything more.
I Got Rhythm. Okay? So it's like this. Let's play those chords slowly. What is that your key? Do you prefer that key?
What am
That's B
I?
flat.
That is B flat. You want to do it in C?
You want to go higher?
I don't, but I
No,
thought you might
tell
want to
me
play it
what
in
you
C.
want.
Yes, B flat, please.
Good. Okay. Dun, dun, dee, dun. I
Old man trouble, I don't mind him. You won't find him round my door. I've got starlights, I've got sweet dreams, I've got a man who could ask for anything more. Oh, whoops, I could ask for anything more.
Okay. Did you hear that progression? Very simple progression. Play those chords, 2, 3, 4.
Oh yeah.
Flintstones, that's rhythm change.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
A little slower. Ready?
Same chord progression?
Yeah, what were we saying?
Blue Moon,
Ready?
right?
1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. And
You saw me standing alone without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own.
okay, it's the same chord progression. The same thing going on. I just slowed it down a little bit. It's this. Blue Moon.
Oh.
Okay. That's why they call them standards. They are standard chord progressions. Earlier we played Honeysuckle Rose, and then we went into the song
Just squeeze
Just
me?
Squeeze Me, a Duke Ellington song. And I was, Haroon? Are you Haroon? Yeah. Okay. I was wondering if he's still Haroon. And he doesn't know these songs, but he's got good ears. He's got quick ears, okay? So I wrote out the chords to this song, to Honeysuckle Rose. And he played it beautifully, and he read it all beautifully. And then I was showing him, like this, I was showing him the roots of the chords so that he could quickly learn the song, Just Squeeze Me. And then when we got to the bridge, I said, oh, it's the same bridge that's written in this song. Okay, again, it proves standard chord progressions. Okay, that was easy, right? It worked beautifully. Okay, go.
Big band time?
Yeah.
Okay. So we did this morning. So for those of you who are here this morning, I ask that you sing out, please. We were talking about big bands. So they have this big horn section, right? So we're still in the 1940s. George Gershwin is writing. There's all this beautiful music being created, and big bands are playing it. And it was like yes, please join us if you have your instruments. Bertha and Zita, if you want to join, you can. Don't be shy.
Yeah, we need leader, leaders.
So we're gonna create a big band here to give you an idea of how a big band works, right? We're sort of taking a place, even though we don't have any horn players here. With our voices, we're gonna create that big horn section. It would have been 16, 17 horns. Big bands are so loud. They're notoriously loud because it's all that brass. And like Pat said, you were talking about soloists, right?
Yeah.
Great players start to emerge from the big bands. They're in these horn sections, but the way it works is that the horns, 15 out of the 16 horns, are playing some little musical phrases. And then one person, like one saxophone player, will get up and solo, play an improvisation of a melody over these little phrases that the rest of the brass is playing. And then they would sit down, and somebody in the trombone section would stand up and take a solo. And then they're going to make a big band with you guys, with all of you. Don't think you're getting out of this. So we'll do a blues. Okay. Maybe I'll sing Centerpiece if that's okay. I'll do a different song this time. Again, the blues are another chord progression, just like rhythm changes we talked about. ba, bo, be, ba. The blues, what we talk about when we say the blues, that is a chord progression, a 12-bar blues. So that means, remember those measures, 1, 2, 3, 4 is a measure, 12 measures, a different chord progression, and it just goes over and over and over again through that same chord progression. And thousands and thousands and thousands of songs, different melodies have been written over that same chord progression. So today, when in the morning, when we did a blues together, we sang the song Route 66. If you ever plan to motor west, it's a pretty well-known song. I'm going to sing a different song now. Same chord progression as Route 66, but somebody wrote a different melody to go with that chord progression. So this is a tune called Centerpiece. Loose that a little bit. Great. Yeah. The more I'm with you, pretty baby, the more I feel my love increase. I'm building all my dreams around you. Our happiness will never cease. But nothing's any good without you. 'Cause baby, you're my centerpiece. We're by a house and garden somewhere along a country road of peace. A little cottage on the outskirts where we can really find release. But nothing's any good without you. 'Cause baby, you're my centerpiece. Hey Randy, do me a favor. Come here. Will you sing? I'm going to sing Centerpiece again. Will you sing Route 66 at the same time?
Really know the lyrics.
Okay. Just make them up. I just want to make the point. Yeah. So here we go. Top of the floor. You ever played to motor west, pretty baby?
Just take my way. That's the highway. That's the
The more I feel my love increase.
Just on a Route 66.
'Cause baby, you're my centerpiece. Great, that's all we need to do. See how he was singing the melody to Route 66 and I can sing the melody to Centerpiece because it's the same chord progression for both of those songs. That's kind of cool. I feel like actually we should work that in. Okay. So I'm going to split you guys into sections. So can these 2 rows, this will be section 1. Randy, will you be the section leader for these 2 rows? Don't be shy. No, you're not. Not today. This, from here to here, section 2. Zita and Berta, section 3. Yeah? You'll be my section leaders. Jackson, you're with me. So, you guys are going to be the brass. You are the 16 or more today horns that would be in a big band. And then maybe me and Jackson, we will solo. We will be the soloists that stand up and solo over you guys. So, we're doing the same chord progression. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And we're going to give you little, really simple phrases that you'll sing over this chord progression. Happy first one. Ba, ba. That's all you have to do. Ba, ba. And then rest. Ba, ba. Wait. Ba, ba. Make sure you're singing that here. Let me hear you. Ba, ba. Good, better. Let me hear you. Okay. This is good. Keep going. I'm hearing very tentative. For brass, right? That's where that term comes from when people say, ooh, her voice is so brassy, right? Because we are imitating a horn, right? And like I said, big bands are so loud because brass is loud. Really lean into it. Yeah, let me hear you. No more, you're getting it. Beautiful. Okay, don't forget section 2. Yes. Go ahead, Zita. Let me hear you. Okay, section 3. Dia. 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 Oh, section 3. Just collapse. Imagine you're a trombone. Dia. Right, your slide. Dia. Let me hear you. Dia. You can run, but you can't hide. Dia. Let me hear you. Slide. Dia. Be a little looser with it. Dia. Maybe we'll check back here. Let's go from Zita. Okay, keep going. Now keep all this going. Now I'm gonna stand up. Jackson, you want to give it a try? Call and response. Anybody want a solo? Just like that. Keep going. Oh! Wilma, you want to take a solo? All right, here we go. Wilma, do a solo. Section 1 out. Section 3 out. Last time. Fantastic. That's how a big band works. And Pat had said this earlier, which I really didn't know, to be honest, that in the early days of big bands, they didn't have written music. And I actually was just so that they did what we just did. They made up little lines and then each section played them together. And I was just I was doing a job where I was singing with a big band. And they did that same thing. They did, like we say, they were calling tunes. So nobody had any music in front of them, but they called these standard songs that people know. Love, Cheek to Cheek, Fly Me to the Moon. They played songs like that that most of the players know. And in an orchestra, like the first chair violin, they're sort of the section leader of the violins. Same thing in a big band, like the lead alto player is the one, or lead tenor player. Somebody leads that saxophone section. There's one trombone player who leads the trombones. And on this gig, I saw one of the saxophone players turn to the other guys. He played a little phrase, boo boo, and everybody heard it and played it with him. So what we just did is very much how in the old days, like when this music was being created, that's how it was created. Again, using your ears, right?
What a concept.
Great. Thank you, section leaders. Thanks for jamming with us. Good job. So I think we should move forward. So the 40s is this peak of the big band era. And remember how I said that a lot of the changes in jazz are sort of the reactions to what came before. So all these guys who are playing in the big band are becoming really great solo players. And so jazz moves away from the big band era. The groups become smaller groups, maybe 4 or 5 people. Same rhythm section, piano, bass, drums, and then maybe 1 or 2 lead horn players. And the tempos speed up. This is what becomes known as bebop. So it moves, the music becomes more complex. And if you want to throw anything in, please feel free, just, whereas swing music was very danceable, bebop starts becoming what I think more like what people think of jazz as now, is this more intellectual music. The harmony becomes more complex and the tempos become fast, so they're not as easy to dance to, right? Unless you want to look like a crazy person. So, you want to use honeysuckle or you want to? Okay. Everything because what you see when I see out with me. I don't have any business, no, sorry. Honeysuckle road. I don't buy sugar, take it out of my cup. You're my sugar. So forth and so on. You want to keep playing? It's fun, right? Charlie Parker. We should mention Charlie Parker in a lecture on jazz. He was one of the main innovators, along with Dizzy Gillespie. They were 2 leaders of this bebop movement. Very complex solos, very fast tempos. Do you want to add anything to that?
She's right about that.
Thanks, honey. So, we have bebop, right? This is 50s.
The thing about bebop, have you heard the music of Charlie Parker or Dizzy Gillespie at all? Has anyone heard that music? Bebop? Some of you know about it. Gabrielle simulated bebop just then. when she was singing a solo.
Yes, and then I.
She did a good job. What was I going to say about it? Oh, there were many imitators after that. Charlie Parker was so unbelievable. It's like he came from another planet. I swear, it's when he showed up, his music was so advanced when he was 25 years old. He was so advanced. He died at the age of 35, and yet he created an entire language in a very short amount of time. And there were many imitators, a lot of people that did their best to be Charlie Parker. Okay, in all the bad things he did too, people did that, hoping that they could at least get part of that genius that he had. He had a terrible drug problem. He never slept. He was kind of nuts, but he had this incredible musical genius. There was something I'm getting at about the imitators. Sorry, I lost it. It'll come back. Well, okay, we're one of them. We're some of them. Some of the imitators. A lot of the music. I mean, the reason why you can solo the way you do is because Charlie Parker existed. Okay, you might listen to, like, what pianist do you like to play, to listen to? Tell me a pianist you like. McCoy Tyner. Great. He played with John Coltrane for many years. There's no doubt that McCoy Tyner was heavily influenced by Charlie Parker. There's no doubt about it. We're still learning about his music. Still, at this point, even though he died in 1955, the year I was born, 63 years ago, people are still learning his music. People are still studying Charlie Parker. Pretty heavy. It'll come back to me. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I also wanted to say, just to drive home this point that you made earlier about learning the language. So that only couple rows, so, I was whatever, I was making it up, I was improvising. But in the improvisation, there were a couple of phrases that I stole from Ella Fitzgerald from listening to her solos. And just like Pat said, it's like they're made up, these musical phrases are a language. They're made up of smaller phrases. A big solo is made up of all these little words, or a little, like, how are you, 3 words maybe. But I only know that because I sang along with Ella. I copied her, and I learned the language that she uses when she solos. And then I'm able to use that when I solo. But it's like these little phrases that you can take away and that work over many different chord progressions. And I didn't mean to do that, but I realized when I was singing, oh, right, I know that phrase. That's an Ella phrase. But it's that language is in my mind when I solo. So we're in bebop. We went from the dancey swing music to bebop, very fast tempo, is complex harmony. And then again, we have a reaction to that. Something that's known as cool jazz or West Coast jazz, because a lot of players who are living on the West Coast were the innovators of this movement. And it's just kind of what it sounds like, cool jazz. They were reacting to the very fast tempos of bebop, and they slowed the tempos down. It doesn't mean that the music isn't as complex. The harmony was still complex, but it's just not those burning tempos. Chet Baker, the horn player, we have a Chet Baker fan in the house, at least one. I love him. He was somebody who's very exemplary of this other style of jazz, very cool, chilled out style of jazz. Miles Davis, right? He had this record, The Birth of the Cool. So and Miles Davis is amazing because he's a leader in so many different stages of jazz music. It's really, talk about like a Charlie Parker, just a brilliant mind who led the way, constantly reinventing the wheel. Peggy Lee is somebody I think of, right? You know the song Fever? Never know how much I love you. It's very sort of small voice. that works great in a recording studio in a way. You know, Ella has like a big voice. She can sing. She has a huge range where Peggy had this very small voice. But in a studio where you're really close to the mic, it's very moody. I think of cool jazz and West Coast jazz as, you know, they create such ambiance. It's such a mood. Never know how much I love you. Never know how much I care. When you put your arms around me, I get a fever that's so hard to bear. You give me fever when you kiss me, fever when you hold me tight. Fever in the morning, fever goes through the night. Sun lights up the daytime, moon lights up the night. I light up when you call my name, and you know I wanna treat you right. You give me fever when you kiss me, when you little fever. I'm on fire. What a lovely way to burn. Everybody is just keep going out the fever. That is something you all know. Fever isn't such a new thing. Fever started long ago. Yeah, Patty. Black coffee, right? All right, so I'm gonna do my best imitation of Chet Baker singing Honeysuckle Rose. So that again, we're kind of this way, we try to use this one song so you can compare apples to apples, right? So you remember what it sounded like early on, then you remember, right? Every honeybee fills with jealousy when they see you out with me swing. I don't live the goodness knows. Taking sips from your lips, how the honey barely drips. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose, that's bebop, right? So we've gone all this way, and now let's start it again. You want to set us up? West Coast style.
It's like a joke.
Every honeybee feels with jealousy when they see you out with me. I don't blame them, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose, when you're passing by, flowers bloom sigh, and I know why. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. Rose, when I'm taking sips from your lips, it drips. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. Honeysuckle. So that's more in that West Coast style. I always feel like Chet Baker sounds like he's got cotton balls in his mouth when he's singing. It's like very mushy. He's amazing. He's brilliant. He was somebody they say couldn't read music. Yeah, I know, which is just it's incredible. And they said that Ella had perfect pitch. They said you could tune the piano to her singing. But Chet Baker, the amazing thing is Chet Baker couldn't read music, and yet, you know, many people have spent a lot of time sort of transcribing, listening to his solos and writing out exactly what he played. And when you look at what he played, it's totally correct. He's outlining the chord changes. He's like doing all the stuff you learn to do in school. And somehow he just knew how to do that instinctively just using his ears. And that, you know, I mean, that style of jazz is still very, very popular because and I don't mean this in a bad way, it's like great background music, it sets a mood, you know, not that I don't think that music is worthy of being the center of attention, but it is that very chilled out, laid back style of jazz, which was a reaction to these very, very fast tempos of bebop. Yes, great. I want to leave time for a little Q&A. There's so much more. Of course, it's like impossible to cover all of jazz history in an hour and a half. There's post bop. There's hard bop. Should we breathe?
Oh, yes.
All right. So, but let's do bossa for a minute. So in the 60s, again, we have this craze where Cuban rhythms and Latin American rhythms really take the music. You know, they become super popular in the U.S. And so we'll give an example of Honeysuckle Rose where we play it with more of a bossa nova feel. Pat is going to kind of set up that rhythm. But bossa nova was a huge craze in the 60s. Is that right? Into the 70s. But it really came to the U.S., hit the U.S. in the 1960s. And this is like another example of how this music from another culture became something we think of as American music because it's so popular. America just sort of claimed it as its own. Yeah? Oh, we're doing that. Oh, hi. Where'd you come from? I love it. Right? So instead of spang-a-lang, 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 or in swing music say walk the dog, walk the dog, walk the dog, walk the dog. That swing beat, now we have right? All these different Latin American instruments, Cuban instruments. Every honeybee fills with jealousy when they see you out with me. I don't blame them, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose. When you're passing by, flowers droop and sigh. I know why. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. Honeysuckle rose. I don't buy sugar. You just have to touch my heart. You're my sugar, so sweet when you stir it up. And I'll take it sips from your tasty lips. How the honey barely drips. You're much sweeter, goodness knows. You are the honeysuckle rose. Have you guys heard "Girl from Ipanema"? Right, all this Corcovado, right? It's all of this music again influences jazz musicians and becomes a part of the jazz language. It moves all the way to free jazz, avant-garde jazz, right? Where like we heard that beat go from something very straight, it keeps loosening up. And it goes all the way to who am I thinking? Skies of America. Who's Ornette Coleman? Thank you. Was a big innovator. And the funny and interesting thing is, free jazz was happening in the 1950s and 60s. So while there are still swing bands and there are people playing bebop, there's also a lot of stuff was coexisting. A lot of different styles of jazz were happening at the same time. It didn't happen like in a necessarily in a linear fashion where one style ends and then another one begins and then another one. They're happening at the same time and playing off of each other in a lot of ways, influencing each other. So if we were to do Honeysuckle Rose in a free jazz style, it might sound like this.
You know how when you take a photograph and you have the camera in front of you, if I was the photographer and I said, okay, ready, I'm gonna take a picture now. Ready? Are you gonna smile? Are you smiling? Ready? Okay, and you're sitting there and you go, like, like when we were kids in grade school and it was picture day. Okay, we all sat there. Okay. And then someone got the bright idea to do freestyle. And everybody goes, okay, it makes a stupid face or something. Freestyle, right? You do that here?
Yeah. I know they do.
So it's the same thing happened in music. Same thing. Okay? So we went from very straight for many years, very
Lots of
not
rules.
rigid. I mean, it went through a lot of different styles, but it all was in this very straight, accessible form. Now we're going to do something very sinewy, very kind of spacey, and there's no form, and there's no harmony, and the melody shows up every once in a while. Okay, and we don't know what we're going to do. Here we go.
Every honeybee fills with jealousy. But with me, I don't blame the goodness those honeysuckle rose. When you're passing by, flowers droop inside. I know why. No sweeter than honey, so rose. It's worth mentioning that at the time people were playing free jazz, there were artists, visual artists like Jackson Pollock. You know that name? You would recognize his work. He had these gigantic canvases and he would dip his brush in paint and just splatter the paint, right? There's no form, there's no figure. He's not painting a landscape, he's not painting a portrait. It's just paint thrown across the canvas. And this music is very much in that same spirit. And it's also, again, a reflection of the times. The 60s ushers in a very turbulent time in American culture. Politically, there's a lot happening. And so art reflects that generally, right? We say art imitates life. Is that the saying? Or is it life imitates art? But in this case, certainly this, breaking down of rules and barriers was part of a larger picture of what was happening in the United States at that time.
So the beautiful thing about living now in the 21st century is that we get to grab, when we go to perform music, we get to grab from this era, that era, that era, that era of music. I'll say of jazz music, but really of music. Okay, and hopefully we will be influenced by Indonesian music by the time we leave here. We will grab some.
Ismail Marzuki.
I know, I want to Terima kasih.
You're in G.
I want to move it.
Okay. So yes, now we are influenced by Indonesian music. It just happened, didn't it? Wow, that's good. How things evolve. And so we're very fortunate that we, like Harun was saying, that we have YouTube, for instance, to learn from. And this is for all of you, for all of us. If someone comes to Gabrielle and says, "Hey, Gabrielle, I want you to sing this song on this concert next week," and she goes, "I don't know the song," immediately she'll go to YouTube and she'll find the song and she'll learn 4 different versions of it. She'll learn Frank Sinatra's version, Peggy Lee's version, Ella Fitzgerald's version. And by learning 4 or 5 different versions, it becomes her own version. She steals from this one, this one, and then next thing you know, it's her own.
And the final step is once I feel like I know the song, I stop listening to other people sing it. Because then I learned from them and maybe take a couple of phrases or two, right, that I liked. Oh, I like the note they changed. Oh, I like the way she phrased that. But then eventually you have to take that step of, well, what is my version? What do I bring to the song that nobody else can bring, right? This whole room, we could all get up here and sing. You could all sing Honeysuckle Rose. Each one of us is going to do it in a different way. It's going to be a different version. And I can't do it the way you would sing it, and so forth and so on, because a great performer and what great teachers help you do is find your voice. Somebody, it was so funny, we were in Jakarta on Saturday night, and we did a concert, and some man in the Q&A raised his hand. He was saying, well, I'm a percussion player, and I play along with the great people, with the great players, but I can't play it exactly like them. And I said, but that's all, he said, is that wrong? And I said, no, it has to, that's great that you are playing along with them. So you are, like we keep saying, learning the language, but you have to go beyond just imitating, right? There are people, we know who are great players, but they sound exactly like John Coltrane. And I know at home there are many, many male vocalists who get stuck imitating Frank Sinatra. It's very hard to be a white male singer and not imitate Frank Sinatra or Kurt Elling, but if you're going to be a great singer, you have to then move on and bring your voice. And that's also where the storytelling comes in. Because I'm going to tell the story differently from all of you because my life experience has been different. And you got to bring that to the music. I want to just say, I want to tell them what Jimmy says because I thought this is super heavy. So Pat plays at this club in New York City 5 nights a week. He's been there for 35 years. And there's a waiter at this club who's been there about that long, if not longer, 40 years. He's crazy Italian guy who waits tables but also sings. And he is an amazing singer. He's really incredible. And he told Pat that he, because a lot of musicians come into this club, a lot of singers and players come in and they sit in with the band. And this guy, Jimmy is his name, he said, I watch all these people come in and I think there are 2 kinds of performers. This is for whether you play a physical instrument or whether your voice is your instrument. He said, I watch people and there's one kind of performer that gets up in front of an audience and says, love me, love me. And then there's another type of performer that gets up and says, I love you. I love you. And I think that's the goal. That's what each of us can do by opening yourself up to an audience. And like I said, bringing your life experience, right? I think like that's why music is so incredible and why jazz music is so special because it's different every time, depending on who's playing it and who they're playing it with. There's so much freedom in that, but it gives you freedom to really bring your perspective to the music and to I think for people who play jazz long term, you develop this courage to do that, to make the music your own. So I think that's something that's so beautiful about jazz. A?
I guess we're going to cap this up with a question.
Yeah, we'll do a little
answer.
Q&A.
I just wanted to say that I realized when Gabrielle was talking about telling the story that this tradition goes way, 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 way back to the beginning of man on planet Earth. And have you heard of the word the troubadour or trouvère? You know about a troubadour? Does that sound familiar, that word? It's when a person would go from one little town to another town, would walk for many, 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 many miles to another town. And he would go to this second town and he would tell the story of what occurred in this town. And he would tell the story as an orator, as a speaker. Sometimes he would talk the story, sometimes he would make up a melody to go along with the story. But he's telling a story, okay? And then he'd walk to another town and tell the story of the two towns that he just visited. And then he'd walk to a third town and he'd tell the story, on and on and on. This happened all over, I know, medieval Europe, probably happened all over the world, where people would just go around to different towns and tell stories. And now in modern times, we have airplanes. We don't need to walk. Gabrielle Stravelli took an airplane here to Indonesia, and she's here right now telling stories. Okay? It's the same thing. Okay? And the thing is about telling a story is to be convincing of your story. And one way to be convincing is to be what our friend Jimmy, the waiter, because if I were to stand here and tell my story with that love me kind of thing, you would listen to me for about 20 seconds, and then you'd get tired of me loving me. Okay? You get tired of me loving myself. So just remember that when you are performers, really everything should go that direction, out into the audience. Everything you've got, just put it out that way. And don't be afraid. That's the first thing. Just don't care. Don't be afraid. Come up on the stage, be a performer. Because you're just telling a story. No big deal. Okay? We can do this. He's doing it. This guy, I can't believe it. You sound great. You sound, I mean, all you wonderful performers that came today, all you singers and drummers and guitarists, bass players, it's really great to travel the world and hear that music has influenced you all. And that, you know, the music that we grew up has influenced you all. You know, and like I said earlier, it doesn't matter what kind of music you play. It's just the fact that you are musicians in the first place is really great. You're telling your story through music. So whatever it is, keep doing it. Do we have any questions? Must be a million questions. So it's the same idea. Don't be afraid to ask a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I know you have a question. I can tell. Yeah, go ahead.
And which one is the most favorite one? I mean, which one is the most favorite one? I mean,
What do you mean? Song or?
swing,
Oh,
something
style. Oh, we do. I think we do love to swing.
people like most?
I mean, the interesting thing is, about New York, like the jazz scene in New York is very big. And there are many different styles that are popular that sort of have their fans. There are people who really like specialize in that early jazz style, that Dixieland. We would call New Orleans is sometimes referred to Dixieland style playing or trad jazz, which is short for traditional jazz. There's a group of people who really like swing music. There is a whole community of musicians who play very avant-garde, very sort of free jazz, more modern style of playing. There are people who love, there's an audience that loves to hear standards. There's an audience that really wants to hear new music that's being composed. So I think that the great thing is there's a lot being offered. There's sort of something for everyone. Swing dancing is still big. There are whole societies for people who love to swing dance and bands that play for swing dances. I mean, I sing a lot of different stuff at home, partly because I am a freelance musician. That's how I make my living. And so I have to diversify in order to make a living. At the workshop this morning, we actually played a church hymn. Because that was like the first song everybody, the group we called up on stage, everybody knew a hymn. And I knew it because I have a church gig. That's one of the things I do. I also have a gig at a synagogue. When it's the Jewish high holidays, I get hired to go sing at this synagogue. So I sing in Hebrew and I get to take part in that tradition, which is amazing. I'm So I feel it's my privilege to sort of have these people who have a totally different, I'm not Jewish, I didn't grow up with that tradition, but this congregation opens up, their arms, and I'm not just there as a musician. They let me really participate in the service. Um, and then I have my gigs where I play music like this, or sometimes I'm doing a concert where it's the music of a particular composer. We do work like this where we get to travel. So I do a lot of different stuff, and I like that. I am somebody who I grew up in a house where my parents played a lot of different music for us. They played opera and classical music and swing music and jazz and musical theater and pop and like R&B. You guys know Roberta Flack? Killing Me Softly, you know that song? So my mom loved her. So I was exposed to a lot of different stuff growing up, and I think that made an impression on me. That sort of developed a taste in me where I like a lot of variety. I like a lot of different styles of music. And I think that, like Pat was saying, there are different styles, but it's like music is music. And what you can take things from every style and let them inform, a different kind of music that you might find yourself playing. So I'm sorry to give you like a non-answer. But I like a lot of different stuff. I think you're similar.
Be open.
Yeah.
Really open to it. Question number 2.
Anybody else? Okay.
No, right.
Great.
Should I stand up?
Sure.
Hi everyone, my name is Cherry. I have two questions actually. So the first one is, I think you are all familiar with Screamin' Jay Hawkins. I put a spell on you. Yeah. That song really made an impression on me, and I was wondering if his style of vocalization is like scat music, scat singing, or is he just like voodoo jazz?
Voodoo jazz. Wow.
Something.
I love that. I am not an expert on Screamin' Jay Hawkins, so I will say that. You may know his music better than I do. I can remember the first time I heard that recording though. So Screamin' Jay Hawkins has this recording of a song called "I Put a Spell on You." Nina Simone recorded that song many years came out. It was really like as weird as that weird Honeysuckle Rose was, where we were just being free, and that's what his music sounded like when it came out. That's what Charlie Parker sounded like when he came out. It sounded like music from outer space.
So he was unacceptable at the time.
Yes, I think it was. And now, and the amazing thing is, even in whatever year it was that I first heard that song, it was still made quite an impression on me. I think to answer your question, like, yeah, I think in a way there's so much blues in what he does. And the blues is you can't have jazz without blues. So there's jazz in what he does because he's singing blues, which is the tradition that jazz comes from. So I don't know if you would necessarily consider it jazz, but I think like this, there's much of like the spirit of jazz in his singing and his performing because it's free, it's very visceral, and it breaks a lot of the rules of what was acceptable at that time, and that's what jazz did repeatedly over the years. So I think so.
What was question number 2?
Number 2 is kind of a sensitive subject, if I would want to say, because it's considered. Do you know the song "Sam Cooke Change Is Coming"?
Yeah.
Now, that song is dramatic for me personally, and in this kind of age, I think it's kind of relatable for me. And I don't know why, but there are some words in that lyrics that I can actually really hit me hard. And I was wondering if that in America is actually banned or something because I can't actually find any cover. Like I can only find one cover of Sam Cooke changing everything in YouTube, and I don't really find any other artists doing that music.
Oh,
Or maybe just a little
Yeah,
In that respect,
familiar
it's
with
not a
that.
cover. He was the first to come out with it. Was he
yeah, I
the
think
first-
it's his song. I
If
think.
he was the first to record it, it wasn't a cover. It was the original.
Yeah, he is.
Okay,
He was.
so-
He was original.
I know there are other people who've done that song.
Oh yeah.
I can't think of who I know. I know there have been other people. It's not banned in the United States. It is a black song. It is about the civil rights struggle.
Is it
So it
black
is.
exclusively?
Yes, it should be. It is not appropriate for a white person to sing that song.
I see.
It's not.
Okay.
And I'm sure there are white people who've attempted it, but you really shouldn't do that. It's not. That's not our story.
Is
You
it
know,
okay
and,
for
and white
Asians
people
do
need
it?
to be respectful of that. And many
Oh.
are, and some are a little not as aware, I will say. And this is a discussion we are having in the States. I will be honest with you. You know, it's a discussion we've been having for many, many years. And right now, a lot of stuff seems to be bubbling up. It's not banned. I personally do not feel it would be appropriate. And I know many people would agree with me. A white person should not sing that song because Sam Cooke wrote it and sang it, you know, in the midst of the struggle for civil rights for people of color in the United States. So, you know, that there's no question that is what that song is about. Does that make sense?
It does.
And that does not mean that you cannot sing that song.
It's not a cultural appropriation if I sing that song. No, this is.
I know, and cultural appropriation is a real issue right now. It's like something that a lot of people are talking about, and then it's a tricky thing
Very tricky.
because American culture is in many ways has been appropriative of so many other cultures.
True.
It's a very very complex
Sorry.
thing. No, don't apologize. It we would need a lot more time, and we would need people in this discussion, people of color. You know what I mean? To make it a fair discussion. Again, a white person talking about cultural appropriation. You know, you need more people who have had different aspects, different who are coming from a different place. Um, but to answer your question again, I'm sorry, it's not banned, and I do know. Keep looking because I know other performers have covered that song, and it's an incredible, it's a beautiful song. It's those lyrics are super powerful, and again, this is what that song is. What music is about. Like music is about helping people feel their feelings, and the more we put music out in the world that helps people process the human experience and feel their feelings, the more peace we will have on this planet. In my humble opinion.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks for a great question.
There was one over here. There you go.
Thank you for your great performance.
Thank you.
I want to ask a question. Many people think that jazz is one of genres of music, but one of my senior in my music club says said that jazz is a way of play the music. What do you think about that?
I'll let you feel it. So he's saying, right? I mean, is it more than just a style? Is it like a way of playing music? Like it's not just certain repertoire. I think he's asking, is it a particular repertoire, or is it this other person is saying it's a way of approaching music?
Yes. Or when you go hear music, how do you know what it is? What music you're listening to?
I think I knew that it was just because the improvisation of the instrument, the singing, the improvisation of the performance.
Right. But there's improvisation in other musics too. In Indian music, it's a lot of improvisation going on. A lot of it has to do with the rhythm in jazz music. But it's not a problem. We were talking about this at lunch, right? Is that jazz, let's say jazz started in the year 1900. And here we are 118 years later, jazz has evolved very quickly in a way in the history of man on planet Earth. It's evolved very quickly. It's gone through many forms. Who's to say which one of those forms is jazz or which one isn't jazz? So like, I'll run through the tradition real quick. Dixieland, traditional, swing, bebop, post-bop, free, da-da, da-da. Now modern jazz, fusion jazz. You're right, in probably 95% of those styles of music, it's improvised. There is improvised music in there. But the feel has changed over time. The instrumentation has changed over time. The harmony has changed over time. The melodies have changed over time. So it's really morphed into a whole different thing that's still acceptable as jazz music. And so has rock, and so has blues, and so has many forms of music on planet Earth have changed over time. And still they remain what we think of them as what their core is, what rock, for instance. If you heard a rock band right now, would you know that that's a rock band, no matter what they're playing? Would you know immediately it's rock and roll or rock or hard rock or what do they call it? Slash metal or all the different forms that rock has gone through. Am I right?
Thank you.
I think unfortunately we ran out of time. But good question, probably.
Okay.
All right, hi.
Hi.
So let me introduce myself. I am not a jazz person at all, and I have no idea whatsoever about jazz. So I personally am a classical pianist, and I'd love to learn about jazz. So, do you have any suggestions as to what is the simplest style probably of jazz that I should get into first?
Do you want to get into it from a piano perspective? Like pianists that played accessibly?
Yeah. Okay.
In the jazz world, there's a fellow named John Lewis. He had a group called the Modern Jazz Quartet. Does that sound familiar at all? Modern Jazz Quartet. And I tell young pianists, and you're a young man, I tell young pianists if they want to learn accessible, pretty easy melodies and where to steal them from, I say go take them from John Lewis. Okay, this fellow he started and you'll love it too because he called it the Modern Jazz Quartet, and his music, the music that he arranged and wrote, was primarily based in the classical world because he was a great classical pianist as well. So he was equally as good a classical pianist and a jazz pianist. And a lot of his music had a lot of the influence of Bach in it. Okay, a lot of counterpoint, because there's a vibraphone player, piano, bass, and drums. So I highly recommend you listen to the Modern Jazz Quartet because it will sound familiar to you. Being that you're from the classical world, that music will sound familiar to you. And you can see how he moved it a little bit to the side to kind of change it a little bit. But again, I'll say it quickly, if you want to really get in there, you have to get in and steal the notes that he's playing. You can find the music online, but rather than do that, it's better to steal it with your ears. Okay?
One other thing that's been very useful for me, for when I want to listen to somebody solo and learn it, sometimes it's too fast. So there are programs, there's a computer program called the Amazing Slow Downer, and there's a computer program called Transcribe. And what it allows you to do is take a recording and slow down the tempo. So that then you can hear the melody go by, at the speed of human comprehension. And then find those notes. And then as I get more comfortable singing along with it, I bump the tempo up a little. And then I work over time to get it up to speed there. And then it's 70% of the tempo up to the original speed that's really fast. And you can even do that on YouTube. I don't know if you guys have discovered this, but if you hit the settings icon on YouTube, you can slow the tempo down. You can slow the speed down. So that's like a seems like a simple trick, but was like life changing for me. Once like, oh my god, okay, boo new babe becomes boo boo babe boo. Then you can really get in there and hear the notes they're playing and start singing or playing along with it. So that may help you as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Gabriel, I guess that was the last question. Would you like to close it out?
We want to thank everybody. Thank you for also just being open to us. And I think there are more than a few people here who are not familiar with jazz. I know we had our workshop participants from this morning who came back, but I think a lot of you have maybe not had a lot of exposure of any. So we thank you very much for being open to us and open to a new kind of music. I'm really evangelical about these kinds of programs. I think if we can, again, if we could just like get people in front of each other, then you find out, oh, it's just a person. There's nothing to be afraid of, right? So we thank you so much for getting in the room with us today, and thank you for singing and going along and standing up and marching and all the weird stuff I asked you to do. So thank you to Haroon for playing with us. To everybody who sang and played, thank you, and thank you, Christine and Esty. Thank you to the consulate for having us here today.
Thank you, welcome.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Okay, kayak gitu kita kasih tepuk tangan ya untuk gimana teman-teman, sudah ada yang convert dari yang nggak suka jazz jadi suka jazz? Saya sudah convert. Udah ada yang convert juga menyusul. Jangan lupa besok kita akan ada konser di Buro Bars and Garden jam 6 malam. It's free entrance, so bring your friends. Terima kasih juga teman-teman yang sudah datang jauh-jauh. Ada beberapa yang datang dari luar kota loh. Mas Afin dari Malang, it's 2 hours away from Surabaya. Straight from Malang, come only for this event. Also we have Mas Dedi from Jombang also. Dari Jombang datang untuk event ini. Terima kasih sekali. Dan kita juga senang, kita punya banyak teman baru, Kevin, Wilman, Cherry, yang kayaknya nih semua pada Pak Bambang suka musik. Kapan-kapan kita main kesini lagi, Pak Bambang main gamelan, mungkin nanti bisa dicampur dengan jazz, dengan klasik piano. Kita senang sekali membuat program dari dan untuk teman-teman. Jadi kalau sekarang we have Gabriel, probably in the next, I don't know, few months, we'll have programs from you for you guys. Okay? Di sini di Amerika. Terima kasih sekali dan terakhir kalau nggak keberatan yang tadi pagi mungkin sudah menulis kesannya, kita ada 1 menit ya, kita sempatkan waktu untuk teman-teman nulis masukan buat kita akan bagikan kertas post-it, nanti kita tempel di dinding. Silakan beri masukan, be brutally honest about this event. You can put your name on it or you can be anonymous on it. Because we want to hear from you. Apapun kita terima masukan, whether it's good, whether it's bad. Kalau 1 sampai 5 nih kira-kira berapa nih? Kalau 1 oke, 5 oke banget, kira-kira di angka berapa nih kita? 5? Ada yang 7? Nggak ada. Oke, 10. I was asking from 1 to 5. If 1 is good and 5 is like really good, in what scale are we? They say 5. Some say 10.
Thank you. Can we take a picture?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm gonna come to you guys. Would you mind that?
Sure.
Thank you. Can we
Di
take a
Indonesia
photo?
nggak ada event kok belum foto-foto ya.
Can we squish together and take a picture?
Kita foto dulu, nanti bisa dilanjutkan kalau teman-teman mau nulis komentar, masukan.